I'm going to be talking today about Plaid. So what is Plaid? Anyone have any contributions? Plaid? That's right, it is a pattern. You were going to say the same thing. Look, you're right. It's any fabric woven of differently colored yarns in a crossbar pattern, or it could just be the pattern itself, doesn't have to be attached to the fabric. So you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with coding, these patterns? So today what I'm going to talk about is how to use purely CSS to create Plaid. And I'm actually going to go step by step through using CSS Gradients. And I just had a few really pretty examples of Plaid for you. You can look a little dapper, with your CSS Plaid. So I have a pretty simple HTML document. It just has a body and has one div. And I'm just going to go through basically. I'm just going to start actually without a gradient, just the background color. So we can just quite simply add a background color to our page. And it helps if I'm in the right CSS file. Let's try this one. So that's pretty basic. It's not really that impressive. But we are working with backgrounds here. And a gradient is pretty simple. A gradient is considered an image in CSS. So we're just going to use the background image property. And I can add a linear gradient, and then I can add my colors to that. So voila, yay, we have a gradient. And it's by default going top to bottom. And we can actually control the direction by adding this property above the colors. I'm adding to right. So now you can see it is going from left to right instead of top to bottom. And we can also have our gradient run at an angle. And here I'm just using to top right. So it'll start in the bottom left. And that's pretty basic too. And there's also, in addition to the linear gradients, which is mostly what we're focusing on today, there are radial gradients. And you can see it is starting in the center and moving out. And because your gradients are part of the background image property, you can actually use gradients in combination with photographs. Oh, but actually, let me just show you before I get to that, I'm going to show. And also, you can use multiple colors. So now I have like this beautiful rainbow. So you're not limited to just 2 colors for your gradients. You can also have color stops. So as you see in the code, I'm specifying orange is going to start at 20% and go to 80%. So I can specify how far out on the page I want my gradients to go. So you see now I have this like nice sunset, and I can put all my text in the center area. The color stops don't have to be soft or graded. If you put the color stops right next to each other, you can get a hard stop and you can get a stripe effect. So you notice that the red is at 20% and the orange is at 20%. It's going to create a hard line. even though this is a gradient. And you see now we have a hard line. And if we take that a step further, now we have stripes. So you might start to see where this is going, because we are trying to get to plaid. Okay? Now, in the prior example, I had hard-coded each stripe, but in addition to having a linear gradient and a radial gradient, you can have another kind of gradient, which is a repeating linear gradient. So let's say you wanted lots of little stripes, you don't have to code each stripe out. You can instead, as you see here, I've got 5 pixels of red and 5 pixels of orange, and those are going to repeat. So if I do this, now I have all these beautiful, really loud yellow and red stripes. Okay. And then remember I was talking a little earlier about the fact that you can use images and gradients together, and you can use the gradient to mask or fade a photo. So right now, this is just the photo. So my background image is here on 127. I have this really nice truck. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy in this radial gradient, and I'm going to put it before the truck. So I have a background image property, but I can actually layer as many images as I want, and those images can be an actual picture or it can be a gradient. And now you see what a nice effect. So the yellow and the red and the orange may be not so attractive for your next website design, but you can see how it can start to become a more sophisticated tool, or a tool to create more sophisticated effects on your websites. Okay, so now that we know that we can have more than one image, we're going to put 2 gradients together, and now I have a diamond pattern. All CSS, no image file. And here I did the same thing, but I just gave it a little more space. And now we almost have like a dot pattern. So it might look attractive if this was like maybe in 2 paler colors. But you're probably still wondering, where is that plaid? And actually, this design is inspired by Joe Alvis, who allowed me to take a photograph of his shirt yesterday for inspiration. And this is the plaid that Joe was wearing yesterday. I just thought this would be perfect. There's also a famous communication and chat channel that you're probably familiar with. And I did my best to recreate their plaid. I don't think the colors were quite right, but it was close. And then some of you who are more fashion-minded may like this one. So we went from some pretty boring 2-color linear gradients of orange and red, and we got to a really beautiful Burberry background. And I did make this chart. You may have seen me using 2 right or 2 top right, but you can actually specify degrees. And I just made this little chart showing in what direction things are going. So you're not even limited to the corners. You can choose any angle you want. And finally, there are a bunch of great resources. The Mozilla Developer Network is always a great place to go. And CSS Tricks has a few really great articles on gradients. There's one person who actually created like just a record image from using radial gradients. So you can get pretty fancy. And I'll just leave you with some inspiration because one of these sites is just so great. And you can see some of the things that you can make. Leah Veru is really cool, and she makes these patterns. Like that yin yang pattern's pretty awesome. And there are some other things. And here are the plaids. Of course, I'm partial to plaid. So, does anyone have any questions?